Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Jennifer Taylor, and today we're going to talk about exploratory research. All right, so let's get started and talk about the different types of research designs. Um, there's three main types of research designs, and they kind of go in higher order. It starts with exploratory research, and this is often called qualitative research, and it's explores and it's about learning about a phenomena, and it is the Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Jennifer Taylor, and today we're going to talk about exploratory research. So let's get started. So we have different types of research designs. The first of which is exploratory research. And exploratory research is all about learning more about a particular phenomena. It's about gaining ideas and insights. It's about learning more about a phenomena before you move into a more complex research design. And by more complex research design, I mean descriptive research, which includes research where you're describing populations and you're looking at specific variables to be able to explain kind of what's going on. And then you have this last and this highest level of research, which is causal research. And this is where you're really looking to examine cause and effect relationships. And causal relationship is often things like clinical research is causal in design, especially when we're talking about double blind. It's really trying to see if we introduce this variable, will these other variables change? And now causal research and descriptive research oftentimes need exploratory research as their initial research that they do before they really get into defining what the descriptive research or the causal research is going to be. They start with exploratory, and usually this happens when some of the variables aren't well defined. Maybe they need to understand things a little bit more. Maybe they're inexperienced with their particular variables that they're looking at, or the phenomena that they're looking at. So they start with exploratory research. So what is exploratory research? Well, exploratory research is all about learning about a phenomenon, and it's almost always qualitative in nature. Now, you could do a survey with open-ended questions and have people fill that out, so it's not quantitative because you're not assigning any numbers and being able to determine frequencies. But it is still qualitative in nature, where you're asking people to give you more rich responses and answers. But it's all about learning. One of the important things to understand is that exploratory research does not solve problems. It explores problems. It doesn't solve them. You use the information you gain in exploratory research to then create research designs to help you solve the problems. But exploratory research is usually part of an overall research plan, which includes descriptive or causal research. It's rarely used on its own when you're trying to solve problems. But it's all about gaining ideas and insights so that you can inform things like strategy development. It's also about obtaining clarity about research problems. So you might have determined your decision problem, determined your research problems, but then realize that one or two of your research problems, you just lack clarity, and you need to understand the phenomenon a little bit more before you can move on to that descriptive design, before you can create survey questions, before you can create scales for the study. So exploratory research informs higher level research design. So it helps you formulate hypotheses. It helps you formulate survey questions and scales. So it helps you with all these different study elements. But again, it doesn't solve the problems. It just helps you create a stronger research design when you're trying to solve problems. So, what are the different types of exploratory research? The first type, and there's several, this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but I'm going to highlight the main types of exploratory research. You have literature search, and this is just looking through all the popular press, the trade, the academic literature, any kind of published statistics. Looking at what other research firms have put out, any kinds of government agencies, looking at census data, looking at different reports from nonprofits, just seeing what's out there. It also includes depth interviews. So actually conducting research yourself and creating these interviews, these in-depth interviews with respondents and people who are knowledgeable about whatever phenomena you're interested in. So if you were interested in understanding why consumers of an organization stopped using your product, then you would interview people who had previously used your product and ask them a series of questions to understand what are the key drivers of those behaviors. Another type of exploratory research is focus groups. And so these are small group interviews. They rely primarily on group discussion, where you get a group of 4 to 6 or 7 people in a room, and you ask the entire group some discussion questions, you let them talk about it, and you obtain insights from that focus group. And the last one is case analysis. And this is simply doing an intensive study of selected examples of the phenomena. Now, there are other types of exploratory research. Ethnography is an example of that, where you go on the internet and you can find information and data and conversations and discussions that are already posted online between consumers that you can then go ahead and analyze. And that's another form of exploratory research. So the question is, how do you conduct exploratory research? And it's really important because, again, exploratory research is typically the foundation of higher level research studies. So it's important to understand how to do this. There are 7 main steps. Determining your research problem, identifying which research problems need to be explored more, searching the literature, identifying the sample, creating an exploratory research guide, conducting interviews, and then analyzing the data. So step 1 is all about your decision and research problems. So when you go into exploratory research, you should already understand what your decision problem is and what your research problems are. And so this is just an example that I've created. What do qualified individuals think about foster parenting and Corpus Christi Family Services? So this is a decision problem working with a client called Corpus Christi Family Services, which I've totally and completely made up. But if this is our decision and research, if this is our decision problem, maybe we identified several research problems. So maybe we've decided that we need to determine the attitudes towards fostering and therapeutic care. We need to measure the level of awareness and attitudes towards Corpus Christi Family Services. We need to investigate media usage and engagement. And we need to determine demographics in the counties that the nonprofit serves. So we've identified these research problems. Now, the second step is identifying which research problems need to be explored more. So maybe if we're determining the attitudes towards fostering and therapeutic foster care, we've identified fears, barriers, and stigmas associated with foster care. We think that's how we're going to determine the attitudes, is through understanding these fears and barriers and stigmas. We also want to assess people's understanding of the differences between foster care and therapeutic care. Um, for those of you who aren't aware, there is a difference between traditional foster care and therapeutic foster care. Therapeutic foster care is when the organization offers social services such as therapy, different kinds of support services and elements for the foster children and the foster parents versus traditional foster care. There are very limited services available. And so understanding, do people know that there's differences between foster care and therapeutic care? We might also determine that, for measuring the level of awareness and attitudes towards Corpus Christi Family Services, that we simply want to assess awareness and attitudes. For investigate media usage and engagement, we want to determine the most consumed media outlets, with heightened engagement. And then for determining demographics in the county served, we're interested in age, ethnicity, education, zip codes, language spoken, and if they can read or write English. Now we have these 4 research problems, and the question becomes which one needs to be explored more? Well, if we feel comfortable assessing awareness and attitudes and determining media outlets and doing demographics, because we already have experience with that, we know how to design the study based on that, then those areas don't need exploratory research. But maybe we're unfamiliar with the fears, the barriers, the stigmas associated with foster care, and really understanding whether or not people understand the difference between foster care and therapeutic services or therapeutic care. So we decide that that is the research problem that we need to explore more. We don't feel comfortable writing survey questions about it. We don't feel comfortable going on and doing a descriptive study that would help our client without exploring this particular topic a little bit more. And once we explore it, then we'll feel really comfortable being able to write our research questions and whatnot. All right, so we've identified which research problems need to be explored more. So now we want to search the literature. We want to look at popular press, trade, academic literature, any kind of published statistics from research firms or governmental agencies. We want to look at Google Scholar, and of course we want to use our library resources, but we're just looking for anything about the phenomena that can inform us as to what it is. What does it mean to have a stigma about foster care? We want to see if we can find any existing studies. If there have been any existing studies, we can learn from those studies, see how they were done, see the questions that were asked, see how it was reported, learn from what they learned from. We can create then, after we do that, we can create hypotheses that were the same or different. Like our area might be different. For example, Corpus Christi, Texas is very different than New York City. So if we had a research study that was done in New York City and they have, clearly identified what some of these stigmas are, but we expect it to be different here in Corpus Christi. And so maybe we decide we want to ask some of the same questions or similar questions. But finding those existing studies becomes really important. So the whole point is that you want to learn as much as you can about the research problem from existing sources. It's cheaper this way. Ultimately, it's about saving money. And you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like a lot of people have already put work into things like this. And so it's important to learn from existing resources. So once you've searched the literature, now it's time to really start working on creating your exploratory research guide. And that, before you can actually do that, first you need to identify the sample. So when you're using exploratory research to inform your description, your descriptive research design or your causal research design. You really need to be able to clarify the problem, create structured questions for the survey. And in order to do that, you need to identify the sample. And so this means you have to create a sampling frame, which is what is your population of everybody that would be included in this particular study. So for example, with foster parents, not everybody in the world can be a foster parent, or if we're just going to focus on Corpus Christi, not everybody in Corpus Christi can be a foster parent. We have certain age limitations. They have to be over the age of 21. You have certain criminal record limitations. You have they have to be able to perform CPR and get CPR certification. And so there are limitations to what that population is. So we have to identify what that sampling frame is, and then we can go and sample from that population. So who are you going to interview? We also have to create a sampling procedure, which is how are you going to reach them? How are we going to gain access to these people for our exploratory study? And what's really important is this notion of generalizability, which is all about, are the people I'm selecting for this exploratory research, are they representative of a majority of the people or a minority of the people? Are there ideas and thoughts that they provide to us going to be an anomaly, or is it going to be representative of many people? So when we're talking about stigmas with things like foster care, or when we're talking about usage, when we're dealing with things like exploring product usage, are they someone who drinks 47 cans of Coke a week? Or are they someone who's more representative of, kind of that middle group, which maybe it's 4 or 5 sodas a week or 2 sodas a week, whatever that general middle ground is. So how confident are you that what you're going to learn from this small group is going to be representative of a larger part of your sample? So identifying the sample, then you can move on to creating your exploratory research guide. And your exploratory research guide is simply a series of open-ended questions. And the whole point is to dive deeper into the research problem. You're trying to get clarity, and you have to be able to ask questions to do that. Now, one of the keys is that less is more. So rather than writing 10 questions that you want your respondents to answer, it's much better to have 1 or 2 and just have those people go really deep into answering those questions. Now, sometimes that's easier said than done, because we could ask a question and the respondent could answer with a yes or a no. So how we design those questions becomes really important. We have to design it so that they'll give us this rich story that they can tell about the phenomena. But fewer questions is better. And a lot of this has to do with the cognitive demands placed on the respondent. So things that add cognitive demands are things like how far back in the past you go, having to have them remember things that happened, longer and longer. That's going to increase cognitive demands because they have to dive deeper into their memory. Complexity. How complex is the question that you're asking? That's going to increase cognitive demands. But less is better. Fewer questions is better. Typically, you do semi-structured interviews where each person is asked the same question, but it's semi-structured because each person is asked the same question, but then some of them you will probe a little bit differently depending on the story that they tell. So one person might tell one story, and you might find something that's really interesting that you want to explore a little bit more, and you ask them some more questions about it. Whereas another person might offer you a different story that has different insights, and you might probe into that a little bit more. So you ask those probing questions to be able to elaborate on those insights. So some examples of exploratory research guide questions. So when looking at a research problem like the motivation for pursuing a degree in marketing, you might have just two simple questions. One, what motivates you to choose marketing as a major? And again, you might have probes that you ask when people give you 1 or 2 word answers. You might ask them to, that's very interesting. Could you elaborate more on that? But what motivates you to choose marketing as a major? And then the other question is, thinking back to your K through 12 education, what was your perception of marketing? So 2 questions, you're trying to dive into that to really understand motivations and perceptions. You might also have a research problem that's looking at the motivation for shopping at an outlet mall. And so you might ask questions like, why do you like shopping at outlet malls? What entices you to shop at outlet malls? And what do you find attractive about shopping at outlet malls? So those are just some examples, and every research guide is going to be very different. It all looks at what's the phenomena that you're trying to explore. Once you have written your exploratory research guide, you kept it short and sweet, but you have the questions, you understand your sample of who you're going to ask, then it becomes time to conduct the semi-structured interviews. And this starts by having your interview guide, and that's going to have your research questions in it. It's going to understand you're going to understand what type of interview you're conducting, the types of questions that you're asking. It's important to understand the sequence of questions that exist within your survey guide. You want to warm them up first and have easier fact-based questions first before you get into the really deep questions. And you have to understand the wording of the questions can impact your responses that you get. Once you've created your interview guide, you prepare for the interview. You need to be concerned about the physical setting. They're coming to you, or are you going to them? What is the setting going to be like? Is it going to make them comfortable? Are they going to feel like they have privacy? Once you sit down with them, you need to set expectations, tell them how long it's going to last, kind of give them a general overview about what you're going to be talking about. You want to make sure you provide them with contact information. And a lot of times when you're dealing with academic research, you also need to provide them with the IRB information. So you'll have an IRB sheet that you give them at this point as well. You might have them sign it at that point, and they're given a copy and you keep a copy. You also want to ask for their permission to record at this time. So record these semi-structured interviews rather than writing down and taking notes, for 2 reasons. One, you can never write notes as fast as people can speak, and your note taking will actually make the interview longer. So it's better to not take notes. And you get richer data when you record it. But the second thing is that your note taking will actually influence the responses that you get from respondents. So they might think they're doing something good or doing something bad, and they might try to give you what you're looking for. If they think they're giving you something good, and they'll go on about whatever it is that your writing has signaled to them that they're doing good. Or if they think that they've done something bad, they're going to clam up and stop talking to you. All right, so make sure you get permission to record, and record if you have their permission. Once you have their permission, you can start conducting the interview. You start your tape, you check and make sure it's working. Try not to take notes during the interview for the reasons I mentioned earlier. You have to stay neutral and in control. You have to keep your face neutral. You have to keep from smiling. I don't want to say keep from smiling. You want to keep it neutral. It's kind of hard to do, to be honest with you, when you're doing these qualitative research. interviews and these semi-structured interviews. But it's really, really important because the respondent is looking for signals from you that they're doing a good job. That's just natural human behavior. So they're looking for signals, and if you smile, then they think they're on the right path, and that's going to influence what they say next, versus if you're frowning or taking notes and maybe you have a furrowed brow when you're doing it. Those are all signals to the respondent. So trying to keep that neutral face is really important. And staying in control, this is really important because it is very easy, especially with certain personality types that are real bubbly and warm, like before you know it, you could be off topic. You could be having a conversation with them without even meaning to. You really have to maintain that control and that professionalism, and to keep from, getting off track. It can happen. Sometimes people are just really good at talking, and they're very personable, and it happens. So making sure you stay in control, and then also using those probes and encouraging people by asking them additional questions, asking them to elaborate more. Again, you have to be careful and keep things neutral with your probes, by saying things like, that's really interesting. Would you mind elaborating more? So you're giving them positive feedback, saying that that's something that's interesting. That's something I'm interested in learning more about, but also trying to get them to provide you with a little bit richer data. So another great video to watch on how to conduct interviews can be found here. And they do a really amazing job, and I'm going to show it to my class. So for those of you who are in my class, I'm going to show this particular video to you, and it elaborates more on all of these things that we've just talked about right here. It's about a 10-minute video, but they do a really phenomenal job explaining how you conduct these kinds of interviews. So once you have conducted your interviews, now you have all this rich data and you have to analyze it. So it starts by reviewing the interviews, reading through those transcripts. Well, if you have recordings, first you have to get them transcribed, and you can do that through various online transcribing services, which have gotten incredibly affordable in the past 5 years. But you want to review those interviews, and you're really looking to identify themes across the interviews. Are there things that several people are saying? And what are those things that many people are saying? You might also find these polarized themes where some people are saying one thing and some people are saying the exact opposite. So what are those polarized themes? And polarized themes are fun because it's really at that point when you go into descriptive and causal research, it's understanding why these two groups are so different. And so polarized themes are, I think, a lot of fun. Then you want to summarize your findings and identify the main themes. You'll have a write-up that you conduct where you identify these main themes and then write a couple paragraphs about what you learned, using quotes directly from your respondents. But also, while you're going through this, you want to think about how you can use this information to be able to create survey questions so that you can create better questions, and so that you can design a better descriptive study so that you can get the best possible data for your descriptive or causal research. So analyzing the data is all about making your descriptive or causal research even better. So that's it for the exploratory research workshop. Again, I'm Dr. Jennifer Taylor. I've had a great time with you today. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it, and hope to see you soon. Bye.